Now that I said that in children's time, this might be one of those passages where you have a lot of questions by the time that we're done with it. One of the most curious and mysterious parts of our life together in community is that the God that we worship dies on an ancient Roman tool of torture, and somehow as a result, the world becomes cosmically different because of that. I can totally understand why Paul feels the need to point out to the young Corinthian church that Greek philosophers would have passed over the work of the cross. They would have thought that the work of the cross was insignificant, unsophisticated, not worthy of being called God's wisdom. The cross was below their self-righteous reasoning and rhetoric. Many first-century Jews would have passed over the work of the cross as well, because they were accustomed to the signs of the covenant given at Mount Sinai, tremendous events like the Exodus. So using the tool of the cross upon which redemption hangs, it seems like a fool's choice on God's part. God could have certainly chosen a way of redemption that made far more sense than the cross does. So Paul writes to the Corinthian church to get the story straight. Why is it, and how is it that God draws close to humanity when we proclaim Christ crucified? It's a story that's deserving of clarification. God chooses weakness instead of might. God chooses folly to shame the proud. God chooses dying in order to live again. The cross is a troubling paradox. A symbol of death is the source of all of our living. What would have been an inglorious execution for a common Roman criminal reveals the glory of God. To those who have come to know this redeeming work of Christ crucified, there's a hymn text by John Bowring that seems most fitting. When the sun of bliss is gleaming, like it is on the Hewitts' faces this morning, light and love upon my way, from the cross the radiance streaming, it adds more luster to the day. The cross on which Jesus most intimately comes to know our pain is like divine light breaking in to an incredibly dark world. At no point is God more Emmanuel. At no point is God more with us than when God is crucified. God becomes very well acquainted with our pain, with our suffering, and because of that, our suffering is transformed and redeemed in this life and in the life to come. Lately, these readings from 1 Corinthians have had me pondering the way that the meaning of Christ crucified shapes our life together. Because first and foremost, we are a community whose identity is shared in Christ. Christ breaks the power of our maladjusted relationships. Christ breaks us free from sin. And Christ reconciles us to one another so that for the duration of our life, we can reclaim the image of God in which we were first made. That ongoing work. One of my favorite writers says it this way: when Jesus of Nazareth died on the cross, something happened, and all the world is a different place. The death of Jesus was that moment when the great gate of human history, bolted with iron bars, overgrown with toxic weeds, burst open so the Creator's project of reconciliation with the whole world could begin. The world is different. And the third thing I think that happens in Christ crucified is that Christ begins to identify with all the victims, all those in every age who know more than their fair share of pain and fear and despair. Christ enters into the humiliation of the cross, the forsakenness of it, so that Christ can become a brother for the humiliated, for the forsaken, and to bring them God's kingdom. Only a suffering God can help us. God always helps us, first of all, by suffering with us. And no suffering can cut us off from our companionship with God. The God of Jesus Christ is the God who is on the side of the victims and the sufferers, in solidarity with them. Over the last 4 or 5 weeks, there's a movie in the box office that's taken the box office by storm. Just Mercy is the name of it. I know many of you have seen it. It's come up in Sunday school. It's come up in dinner conversations. Have you seen this movie? There's a book by the same title. And the book tracks with the work of highly esteemed lawyer Bryan Stevenson. And the book tracks Bryan as a young lawyer who's moved to the Deep South to provide legal counsel for the most desperately vulnerable members of society in their trials and tribulation in a messed up justice system. And by following Bryan's cases, the reader's introduced to children who are underrepresented with legal counsel, those who are too poor to be represented in courtrooms, they're wrongly condemned prisoners, those that are exonerated by Stevenson's noble efforts. And then there are landmark judicial rulings that we learn about, like the Roper versus Simmons case in 2005. Just in 2005, when states were prohibited from executing juvenile offenders. In addition to tracking with Bryan's cases and the relationships involved with them, we learn about the tremendous work of the Equal Justice Initiative that Stevenson founded in 1989 in an effort to represent the most vulnerable in their proceedings. Today, the Equal Justice Initiative has grown in the scope of its work. It's still committed to ending mass incarceration and excessive punishment, to challenge racial and economic injustice, and to promote the most basic rights for our American brothers and sisters. When the staff of the EJI began to research what was it that they were running up against in court proceedings, they began looking at the history of racial terror, especially in the Deep South. That would include us. And what they discovered were stories of lynchings all across the Deep South over a 90-year period of history. Many of the stories of lynchings of Black Americans had never been officially added to the record. They were only told in personal journals, in newspaper clippings. Once the research team of EJI had finished its work, they produced a white paper to raise awareness to this part of American history that lived in the shadows. And they also began dreaming that one day there would be a national memorial that told this story. And so downtown in Montgomery, Alabama, on my birthday, on April 26 of 2018, the National Memorial for Peace and Justice was opened. And as you enter the front lawn of the memorial, there's a piece of artwork that raises the awareness that racial terror began with slavery, the first slave ships that arrived on our shores. And as you proceed deeper into this memorial, there are 805 carvings, we might call them. And each one of those 805 carvings commemorates one of the American counties in which a lynching took place, and there are 4,400 of them to commemorate. Williamson County, one of the most desirable communities in America in which to live, is counted among one of those 805 counties where a lynching took place. Less than 2 miles from where our feet are planted, right down Franklin Road on Franklin's main square, Amos Miller was lynched on the balcony of the Williamson County Courthouse in 1888. There are a dozen stories of lynchings that took place in this county. You may be thinking, I can see it in your faces, preacher, why in the world does a lynching that's over 130 years removed from us matter to the proclamation of Christ crucified? Here's the answer. If the God of Jesus' cross is found among the least, the crucified people of the world, then God is particularly found among the lynched of American history. If the God of Jesus' cross is found among the least, the crucified people of the world, then God is most particularly found in those lynched in American history. That is a tough, it is a challenging word to any predominantly white community of faith whose racial history is supremacy and privilege. God very well may be in deeper, abiding relationships with our neighbors who don't live on gilded avenues. If we boldly declare as a people that Christ is among our neighbors, those that most look like Christ crucified, then it is time for a full moral inventory to see if we, the church, Christ's people in the world, are in deep relationships with the places and the people that Christ most intimately knows on the cross. Some of those folks that Christ knows most intimately through crucifixion might be victims of racial violence or social discrimination, the civilian casualties in our perpetual war zones, or the local poor of Williamson County who carve out a meager existence. Let's not give lip service to Christ crucified and bypass the call of discipleship to grow relationships among our brothers and sisters who already know that Christ is in solidarity with them. When we foster solidarity with our suffering siblings, we will find ourselves more at peace in God's kingdom. As we enter into a moment of silence, where are the places and who are the people where you need to deepen your relationships with? Bless you.